I'm John Green. On today's U.S. Crash Course History, we're going to be discussing the beliefs and the culture that would one day influence America. Now, America was created not just through American citizens, but through a plethora of different races that have been encountered. The Europeans, the Native Americans, the African Americans, and later on, we'd also see influences from the Chinese Americans and Mexican Americans as well. One thing I really want to point out is that America is such a great country due because of all the different races and backgrounds that we have. Cue the intro, Stan. Although we like to believe that America was originally home to Americans, it wasn't. It was home to thousands of different Native American tribes. And these tribes believed that the land they owned, which no one actually owned in fact, belonged to everybody, and the land was family. The Europeans didn't have this same perspective, however. This resulted in two major conflicts, Pontiac's Rebellion and the Pope's War as well. Now, in both cases, the Native Americans didn't do so well. And to add on to the failure, diseases also killed and ravaged thousands of their population as well. Dang it, diseases, always killing people. Another thing I want to point out is how slavery wasn't that big in America's earliest history. In fact, many farms were managed by indentured servants who worked the field just like a slave would. However, after Bacon's Rebellion passed, many people began importing more slaves from Africa to America in the hopes of getting more bang for their buck, I guess you could say. Now, even though slavery was occurring at the time, slaves would go on to go and influence American culture. Slaves would one day influence music through the use of their jazz. And not only that, they would also be influenced by different Christian and Catholic beliefs in order to create the first African Baptist church. Another thing I want to mention is that many of the slang used by slaves were also used in today's modern tone, like banjo, goober, or yam. You gotta love the banjo. What's that, Stan? Time for the mystery documentary ready? Thank you, Stan. The rules here are simple. I answer this document and I tell you the author. I get it right, I don't get shocked with this pen. I get it wrong, and I do get shocked with this pen. Let's see what we have here. Man being born, as he has been proved, with the title to perfect freedom and an uncontrolled enjoyment of all the rights and privileges of the law of nature, equally with any other man or a number of men in the world, hath by nature a power not only to preserve his property, that is, his life, liberty, and estate, against the injuries and attempts of other men, but to judge of and punish the breaches of that law in others, as he is persuaded the offense deserves, even with death itself, and crimes where the heinousness of the fact, in his opinion, requires it. Okay, Stan, I know this one. This is the Second Treaty of Government by Enlightenment thinker John Locke. Yes! As the mystery document stated, the Enlightenment influenced many parts of American culture throughout the early times, right before the Revolution hit. And the Enlightenment also, with its ideas by John Locke, stressing life, liberty, and property, also began to make many Americans feel oppressed by British rule. Now, this can be seen through our founding fathers, who also took a page out of John Locke's book, where instead of life, liberty, and property, they replaced it more with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, these would one day become the inalienable rights that many Americans believed to have. Unfortunately, at the time, this only meant rich, white, land-owning men. So minorities and women were out of luck for this part. As time went on, America began to import different types of machines from, well, British, of course. Now, this created the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution ceased all agrarian-type farming in the North. There were still the yeoman farmers that existed, but mostly in the North, many people began to move to cities in order to get jobs there. The Industrial Revolution also had different types of effects. Some people believed it to be good, while others hated it and thought it was a heinous crime. These people were known as the Transcendentalists. Such can be seen from Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. Both men believed that emotions, nature, and being away from any technology was the key to living in today's society. In contrast to the Industrial Revolution, many Americans also began to take part in the arts and began landscaping or painting the environment as well. Now, this could be most seen in the Hudson River School, with two of its most influential members from graduation. We have George Catlin and Thomas Cole. Now, this landscaping was able to increase the nationalism of America itself. Cue the Libertad, Stan. You just gotta love that Libertad, don't you? Unfortunately, inequality still existed throughout America. Abolitionists at the time, such as women, African Americans, and William Lloyd Garrison, were on the rise. However, Southerners were finding new ways to justify slavery. Some of them even said that slavery provided slaves with a home, food, and resources. Later on, this would be used in social Darwinism to excuse America for all the other poor races that it had to conquer during this time. Now, let's skip ahead to the 20s. Oh, Mr. Green, Mr. Green. Yes, finally something I can relate to. Yes, me from the past. Things like the movie industry and music industry finally come into play. Cue that thought bubble, Stan. As more and more inventions are being made, Americans had more and more leisure time. The standard of living also increased and shifted the focus from Christian and patriotic figures to sport figures and movie stars. Figures like Babe Ruth, Charlie Chaplin, Harry Houdini, Lillian Gish, Katharine Hepburn, Greta Garbo, Gary Cooper, and Rudolph Valentino shaped American culture, instead of George Washington or Lincoln. During the wars, Americans also often used the film industry as a form of propaganda. This convinced the common American that the Japanese was the enemy when they attacked Pearl Harbor. They also turned the nation against Germans and communists, causing much of the problem during the Red Scare. Pop culture became even the main focus of most of Americans' lives. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Now, as the Thought Bubble stressed, the youth were constantly looking for a new culture of their own, and this took shape in the counterculture. The counterculture went against many of the modern-day values held at that time. Now, many old-timers, known as conservatives, were not exactly opposed to it, but they didn't exactly see it as something that they should go with, because this showed that the youth had power even at modern times. During this time, many Americans began to turn towards a more traditional form of government. This took form with many conservatives, being led by Ronald Reagan. Men such as Milton Friedman, William F. Buckley, and George Will, and institutions such as the Heritage Foundation, were able to influence many Americans. Many of these conservatives believed that abortion was wrong, that schools should allow prayer, and also believed that America should have less strict rules and laws. However, the other side of conservatism believed the opposite and thought that the government should have more strict control over them. Although Ronald Reagan was able to bring both sides together, and this resulted in a more peaceful time. This also included the Cold War, which ended around the same time, bringing America back into a more peaceful period in its history. As you can see, American culture isn't just shaped by one person or even one race of people. Instead, it's been built from a bunch of different contributions from a plethora of different races and people throughout history and time. And instead, what makes America so great and amazing is not just how it's able to have so many different races and cultures in one point. It's how all these cultures are able to come together at the end of the day like a jigsaw puzzle. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.
Crash Course US History is produced and directed by Deb Tana. Our associate producer is Rebecca Wing. John Green is played by Papa Midley, and young John Green is played by young Papa Midley. Special thanks to our script supervisors, Josephine No and Alana Zhang. This is Crash Course US History is dedicated to our high school history teacher, Mrs. Arnold, and our period class, period 2. This show is brought to you by Table 7. And as we say in our hometown, don't forget to be awesome.